Okay, I think we're ready to get started, actually. And just for the record, this is actually the Breaking the Stigma Experiencing Psychedelics panel, not mental health, but all the rest of the information is correct, so just so there's no confusion there. We'll do some introductions really quickly. My name is Rachelle Gordon. I am a cannabis and psychedelics journalist and writer. I've been freelancing in the space for the last 5 years. I transitioned from the legacy market in cannabis into the legal market writing, which is really fun and exciting. I've been featured in several publications, High Times, Cannabis Now, Double Blind magazine. I also provide some copywriting services for brands and ancillary products. Really excited to be here moderating this panel talking about breaking stigmas. And we're going to have a really awesome conversation. We have some really, really amazing experts in the room. So I'm going to let the panelists go ahead and go one by one and introduce themselves a little bit before we get into the questions. So go ahead with Max.
You want me to start? All right. Hello, my name is Maximo Serrata-Sawdey. I'm a graduate from the University of Minnesota who studied plant sciences with a breeding and genetics track, and I'm a mycological hobbyist, if you might say. And yeah, I'm also excited to be here talking about psychedelics and mushrooms today. So yeah, it's good to be here.
Yeah, my name's Christopher Pauly. I'm a geneticist and kind of genetic test designer. I'm also a co-founder of Trippy Technologies that designs genetic tests and does chemistry on ethnogenic plants. And yeah, it's great to be here as well.
My name is Reid Robison. I'm a psychiatrist based in Utah and chief medical officer at a company called Novamind, a Canada-based company, and I focus on the therapeutic use of psychedelic medicines in healthcare, including ketamine, MDMA. I'm coordinating a study for MAPS using MDMA for eating disorders, and bringing psilocybin into clinics soon for depression and other studies.
Hi, my name is Karina. I am founder of Hyphy Studio. We are a food science and commercialization firm, so we build natural, non-synthetic food brands and take them to mass market.
Awesome. Welcome, everyone. It's nice to see you here. So yeah, this conversation is about breaking stigmas and what's happening nowadays to shift the paradigm and the narrative about psychedelics and plant medicine. I just want to say, from personal experience, I think that, the legal cannabis market has certainly helped introduce the conversation for plant medicine for a lot of people. I know my own personal experience, I started consuming cannabis as a teenager, and psychedelics weren't that much long after, and so it's sort of interesting to see this kind of replay one industry after another. There was a lot of really amazing research done on psychedelic compounds in the earlier part of the 20th century, and it wasn't until the 60s when a lot of these compounds became criminalized and a lot of this research ended, and they were really making amazing advances for lots of different mental health disorders, things of that nature, which I know Reid can talk a little or speak to a little bit more later. But now that we're experiencing this new psychedelic renaissance, the research that has been dormant for so long is sort of making a comeback, and people are more interested and open to what these compounds can do for them and for the greater good, which is really awesome to see. So I kind of wanted to start with Reid, speaking to the psychiatric and the wellness, the healthcare potential in psychedelics. There's so much promise there, and there's so much research happening right now. Can you maybe speak a little bit to the state of the research right now and what your organization is doing to move that needle forward?
Yeah, sure, happy to. So I'm approaching this from the standpoint of bringing psychedelics into mental health care. And in order to navigate the system, we have to do that. The typical approach is through clinical trials and then accessing them as medicines. And so if you look at at what's available now, it's, every state's different, of course, like we were talking about the last hour. Portland or Oregon has set out some legislation to make it possible to access these for therapy, like psilocybin for therapy. Around here, decriminalized is a huge step. To have them as prescribable therapeutics, there are these big hoops to jump through, doing clinical research study in hundreds of people, very costly, which results in costly medicines. But I'll also approach it through trying to use someone's health insurance to access these. So right now in clinics in Utah, we give ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, so using ketamine as the psychedelic medicine or the therapy aid to help someone get outside of themselves, see things from another perspective. We do a lot of that work, but then in more limited numbers and more controlled ways, we'll do clinical trials of these medicines. And it is extremely exciting, though, when you look at the potential of, say, psilocybin-assisted psychotherapy for depression. It's just, it's beating in a dramatic way treatment as usual without even having to take a daily pill. So you take, say, 1 dose of psilocybin plus therapy, leading to improved mood, optimism, well-being, openness for months after that. MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for PTSD is wildly effective after 2-3 doses, 70%. No longer even meet criteria for PTSD 6 months later. That's a response rate we could only have dreamt about before for big numbers of people. So it's an exciting time for sure.
Absolutely. And I wanted to ask a follow-up to that. We didn't talk about this earlier, but I'm just interested in knowing, how the pharmaceutical industry is going to respond to something like that, when you don't necessarily have to take a pill, every single day, and how will they respond to the fact that you can have a treatment and have it be so impactful for so long?
We'll just charge $1 million a dose. It'll be expensive, and but the ones who might be concerned about it are not the ones bringing, say, psilocybin to market. You have Compass Pathways or USONA working to bring psilocybin-assisted psychotherapy to market, and they're spending millions, and they will have some kind of patent protection around this, access to psilocybin for that indication, but they also will make money from the training of therapists to give it in the right way. And, it will be more expensive than a 90-day supply of regular antidepressant. Is just kind of how the system works. So people worry about the industry trying to stop that. I don't think it's a train that can be stopped. I don't think it's, the ones bringing it to market, they're well aware of the revenue model, but there's such a need that there's plenty of revenue for them to make by getting it out there to people, even if it's taken 1, 2, 3 times and then you're done. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing your insight on that. I wanted to go to Chris on the genetics side. We were speaking a little bit in the green room earlier about, the different types of, specifically we're talking about psilocybin mushrooms, just about how the different genetics will impact people in different ways. And I shared an anecdote of, I started microdosing psilocybin, doing the Paul Stamets method of stacking with lion's mane and niacin and doing 0.2 grams. And I was really, really impacted by the 0.2 grams. I thought, I'm on mushrooms right now. I don't know if this is what it's supposed to be like. And your answer to that was, well, it really could have been, the cultivar, right? And so how will advancements in genetics help people understand what compounds are right for them, and how will it help legitimize the industry?
Definitely. And so, just kind of to further that point, with the Psilocybin Cup recently, we realized that there's at least a 3-fold potency difference in some of these mushrooms, that you can have less than 1% in a lot of different strains, and then over 3% in certain strains. And so that kind of difference difference in level of potency is really big when we start talking about dosing formulations, because 0.2 grams of one type of mushrooms is completely different than 0.2 grams of another type of mushrooms. And one other thing within just kind of the genetics of it, it's really tied to the chemistry, because that's what we're trying to predict with the genetics here, is what chemicals are these producing? What does the profile look like all around, and is it going to be suitable for kind of your everyday user? Or there's some kind of warning signs that we need to watch out for, like MAOIs being produced naturally in some of these mushrooms could interact negatively with some other medication somebody's on. And so that may give somebody a really negative experience with mushrooms when the mushrooms would have been a positive experience otherwise. And so that, I think, part of removing the stigma to this is understanding the chemistry behind it, because that'll then allow us to tell people, like, I can know that you won't have a bad interaction on this. Or if you generally have anxiety, maybe you want to take a less potent mushroom because it will kind of just be more mellow of an experience for you. And so I think kind of understanding the genetics will give us a way to kind of classify these mushrooms, because right now we all say a cube's a cube, and most of them are the same. They're really similar in potency, and there's slight differences and minute differences in these cultivars that either are growth rate, size of the fruit, but the effects of them are very, very similar to each other. And so with genetics, we can start to cluster what's most similar in these kind of broader range of mushrooms that are out there, and say, okay, I can say within this like penis envy strength that these other mushrooms cluster with that genetically. Odds are they're also more potent, carrying similar effects with them, and really trying to understand where this interplay between the chemicals that are being produced by the mushroom and how they're working with our body. And it's more than just psilocybin. And that's one thing that I've heard a lot about throughout this conference, is that most people are doing full ground up mushroom infusions because of the entourage effect that is with this massive chemistry, massive chemicals that kind of comes in a profile. It's not just one compound or the other. You're getting this suite, and that's what's causing the effect that we feel. But yeah, I'd say I think the genetics will ultimately end up supporting giving people like a customizable psilocybin experience. And that's something that I personally want to work towards, and hopefully can breed new strains of mushrooms that can even farther customize that experience in a way that's beneficial.
Absolutely. Does anybody else have anything to add to that? Maximo, do you have anything to add on that note, on the genetics from the agricultural side?
Yeah, I mean, I think genetics are huge, definitely very important, and yeah, we have to understand the genetics before we can, do further research on it. Absolutely, and that's also going to help better understand, how to cultivate, certain varieties. Even though the cubensis is very similar across, many of the varieties, there are subtle differences, and some of those subtle differences could make a huge difference in yields or growth, maybe when you're trying to scale up, or if you're switching up your technique or any of those variables.
Right. And I think, you both touched on the point that these compounds will affect people in different ways just in general, because all of our body types and our body chemistries are so different. And I know, Karina, for example, you don't actually, you aren't affected by psychedelics, correct? So, but you are a huge proponent of these entheogenic medicine, because you've seen what they can do. Now, you're on the formulation side. So how does formulation and dosing play a role in all of this? And what about like synthetic versus non-synthetic? How will that impact the market in the future?
So, thank you. I'll clarify that I have a condition where when I close my eyes, I don't have the ability to visualize. It's all dark. So technically that renders me unable to hallucinate visually. So, but what I can speak on is microdosing, and how this can really clear the taboo surrounding mushrooms right now, because the conversation quickly in the mainstream can go, well, if you're taking mushrooms, you're tripping, you could have a bad trip. It's this esoteric fear that's embedded in us. When really, yes, it is a spiritual calibration. You're calibrating to a plant that has an incredibly high frequency if grown well, and you can tap into other dimensions and that sort of thing. But ultimately, the metric of dosing, and Reid could speak to this better than I, but how do we know that it's working? How do we know mushrooms have any sort of efficacy and relevancy? Well, if you just look at addiction, just as an example, caffeine addiction, alcohol addiction, these things can be pretty much flatlined with small daily dosage of a natural non-synthetic substance that keeps you functional throughout the day and expands your consciousness rather than contracts it. So in my world, while I can't formulate with this legally yet, in the next few years, it'll be that way, more mainstream. But I'm excited to have more like prescription style snacks where it's like, okay, you can take this one in the AM, you can take this one in the PM, and it's just these micro doses combined with like the Paul Stamets stacks where you do the 4 days off, 3 days on, and you have more of a safety net with well-being rather than this indulgence.
Yeah. Oh, I just wanted to speak to the bit on overcoming addiction. I actually had a personal buddy of mine who he was smoking cigarettes for most of his life, and one time at a concert, he ate a heavy dosage of mushrooms, and he went to go light a cigarette up. He looked at it. He said, "This is disgusting," and he hasn't smoked cigarettes since. And I just always thought that was a really cool story, and I think that just kind of goes to show what she was talking about a little bit.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of research showing the efficacy of certain psychedelic compounds in addiction. I know LSD and alcoholism was one big one, and ibogaine as well. Reid, did you want to add anything about that? Do you have any insight about psychedelics and addiction?
Sure. Yeah, I think they're incredible tools for that to, show us our patterns, show us how ridiculous some of the things are that we put into our bodies, or like in an unconscious way, they wake us up to what we're doing. And so there are the different signatures of a given psychedelic, like ibogaine, found to be extremely useful for opiate addiction or addictive patterns. But I think psychedelics in general are incredibly helpful in overcoming addiction. Like you mentioned with LSD, there were, I think, in the 50s and early 60s, just in Canada alone, there were like 5,000 to 8,000 individuals with alcoholism who went through LSD therapy, and rates of recovering from alcoholism were just like, I think, twice as good as treatment as usual. And we were talking last hour as well about even the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, Bill Wilson, overcame his alcoholism through LSD and tried to get AA to buy into it, but at the time, no way. But that it would be a different story now. Like the psychonauts are coming out of the closet. We have people tripping next door. People love to talk about it. The conversation is changing. So I think that's going to make some huge strides as we have this open dialogue.
Yeah, no, please go ahead.
So for me, personally, I consider psilocybin, microdosing, and maybe other, I would prefer to stay in the non-synthetic realm, but for me, it's an exciting prospect to think of our society going beyond talk therapy, because, and I don't want to offend you because I'm not a psychiatrist, but I know a lot of people that go to talk therapy, and it's almost as if they're perpetually stuck in this past victimhood. And this tool is basically a form of liberation, where it's like you can face your trauma head on, and work past these blockages and kind of evolve out of that and be a creator as opposed to victim.
Yeah, oh, I like that. No offense taken whatsoever. I love how these tools are kind of democratizing therapy or opening up the dialogue for everyone, where, you'll see people guiding their mom or their sister in a psilocybin journey and having profound healing. And the benefit that you see, not just for the individual taking the dose, but the one guiding is incredible. Like, I love what these tools are doing for family-based healing, for getting past some of these intergenerational traumas and the suffering we've been just passing down kind of mindlessly for ages.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been trying to manifest an ayahuasca experience for my little sister and myself to help heal some of our past childhood traumas. And I think it'd be a really special experience as a family. And, something that you guys touched on just a minute ago is the point of psychedelics unlocking so much in your mind and allowing you to see so much more. My friend Harry Resin and I often talk about how psychedelics, particularly LSD, you're really holding up a mirror, right, to yourself and to what's around you. And if you're really willing to take a look into that mirror and see what's there and head it and take it on full blast and just be willing to be with it and face it, I think is really, really remarkable and powerful. And I think part of that goes back to why things are so taboo, because after you've come back from an experience like that, how are you supposed to, think the same way? And I think for a lot of people, that sort of mentality is really scary, right? Like having that profound experience. Ooh, that was close. So yeah, I think it's something that, people are recognizing that it's possible to have these experiences and, have a better quality of life. But I think for some people, it's still really frightening. So.
Yeah,
go ahead.
So, speaking to the, accepting of self too, I think part of that too is you figure out, once you can accept yourself, then you figure out, okay, how can I, you basically figure out how you can change yourself as well. And, maybe fix those things that you don't like about yourself or you feel are weighing you down, or something that you want to face and correct. So I think that's a part of it too.
And one thing I'd add to there as well, just within kind of the stigma that's been put on any drug that's a hard drug, the re-education of society and saying that these are different. Like, psychedelics are not like hard drugs like meth or heroin. Like, these are completely different effects. And I think that is going to move us in the right direction to even start basically accepting these into our culture, because it's something that our parents have been told their entire life that LSD is the devil or LSD is going to fry your brain. And it's like these just weird kind of nonsense that's been just passed down from generation to generation. It's really, I think, caused that fear in the society. And so when people go into a psychedelic experience, their mindset is already afraid, which isn't the best thing to enter a psychedelic experience with.
Right, and that's something that we spoke about earlier in the green room too, if I recall, having your intention. If you think you're going to have a terrible time, then you're going to manifest a terrible time. So, that and the set and the setting, which, is spoken about a lot, having the right mindset, the right environment will really enhance your experience and help guide your experience.
So one thing to add to that, though, I completely agree that if you go in with anxiety, you might blow it up, amplify it. But if you look at the data from psilocybin, looking at who has the most lasting changes, it's individuals who had a high score on like the mystical experience questionnaire and a high score on, say, an emotional breakthrough inventory. So you combine like a mystical spiritual experience with going through the dark night of the soul or facing something difficult emotionally and getting through the other side, which you do on these safe psychedelics, even if it's terrifying, that's when you have like lasting changes or really change yourself as an individual. So
Revelation almost.
Absolutely. This is an awesome conversation. I wanted to speak a little bit about on the agricultural and production side, if you want to speak to that, Maximo, about how, the advancements that have been made in cultivation, specifically with cubensis mushroom, and just production in general. What's changed recently? What would maybe surprise people about the production, and how will that help legitimize the market as well?
Well, yeah, I guess the biggest change would be how much more information is available to us. How much more widespread it is, and just how much bigger the community has become over the years, like since the 60s, since it's become so taboo. Prior to that, we were at least harvesting, mushrooms. I can't per se say cultivating them way back when, but we were harvesting them and using them some way, somehow. So, that just goes to show, already there you have an advancement of usage and cultivation there to where we are today. I think the size of cultivation is probably going to become more, increase. And I'm just dragging on here. Sorry, guys.
Chris, do you have anything that you want to add to that on the agricultural end?
I think you did a good job describing it. I think the bigger side is going to be also proving to people that this is a science-based product. This isn't, mushrooms from your neighbor anymore. There still can be the opportunity for that, and I think most of us on this panel don't want to take away individuals' right to grow their own medicine. That's something I think cannabis kind of established for people as a right. It's the idea to explore yourself and to produce the medicine that you need. But the other side of it is similar to cannabis. There's issues with microbial life and other fungal pathogens that can produce mycotoxins or produce some of these compounds that can hurt people. And so there should be some type of regulatory framework surrounding that. And I think once we even have a draft of what that looks like, this is going to open the door to so many more people to say, okay, this is a safe medicine now. I understand what's in this. I understand the care that went into growing it. And just legitimizing it in that way, I think, is going to really change people's mind from being, this is, a mushroom growing on a cow patty, to this is a sterile, similar to a cannabis bud coming out of a state-of-the-art dispensary grow these days. It's clean. You can put it on a petri dish and make sure no mold or mildew grows on it. It's like, that's another level of clean cannabis that anybody that bought cannabis before recreational legalization, odds are you would not have been able to roll your butt on a media plate and not get mold growing. It's something so new. But I think that it's going to fall right in the same path for psilocybin as well.
Yeah, I would agree about that.
Oh. Yeah, and I was also going to say, I guess, getting closer when people are cultivating their medicines, right? I think that's even another step up to the usefulness of them. When you're growing your own medicine, you're not relying on some foreign entity, some mega $1 million company or whatever, or even some people that you just you're not familiar with. When you're growing your own medicine, you know where it's coming from, you know what you're consuming, and I think that goes to the healing process as well. Just being comfortable with what you're taking and not worrying about what you're putting into your body.
Absolutely. Well said. I wanted to open it up for questions if anybody in the audience had any questions. Don't be shy. I'll start over here.
You were talking about formulation of the psilocybin. Are you talking like lemon tech? Are you talking activating it before? Because we were talking earlier in the other room about some of these settings and being in that setting for 4 or 5 hours for the person. With lemon tech and activating the mushroom with an acid, it hits you a lot faster and it goes away a lot faster. I was wondering, is that what you're talking about, the formulations of the psilocybin? Or are you just, sorry, go ahead.
So that's more Harry's field. I work with consumables generally. So yeah, I would incorporate it with cacao and tonics and potions, and definitely build on the entourage effect of other herbs. That would be my route.
Right, because you're going to eventually, we'll be able to know, like, okay, well, if you want to have this experience at this time of day, maybe have this product combined with these other compounds, right? So that's why, sometimes you'll see a CBD with a lavender for like a nighttime effect. Is that kind of the direction that you're going in?
Yeah, and so I'm really intentional with when I build a product from start to finish, working with credible suppliers and making sure that the inputs are high quality so that your output experience is as high caliber as possible. But ultimately, it is still up to the individual to self-actualize the intention and use properly. I mean, anything can be abused. Alcohol and cocaine laced with fentanyl and all of this nightmare scenario stuff, and we're dipping our toes into this really potent, wonderful medicine, and it's scary because it's so taboo and so spiritual, but yet, cocaine isn't a problem. Like, this is not a party drug. This is actually a self-actualizing drug. So being clear on what it can do.
Absolutely. Did you have a question?
Yeah. It's kind of for you, actually.
Yeah, sure.
You're a content producer in this industry and a writer and put forth information. I'm curious how you've seen, what impact your writing has had in reporting on this as far as breaking the stigma. Like you said, you've been doing this for 5 years. Have you seen, this greater production of articles, and are you able to reach more people, and I guess what that looks like?
Yeah, thank you so much for asking. So it's definitely become more mainstream. There are way more mainstream publications who are interested in talking about these things. And part of it has to do with the business side, right? We're seeing a lot more publicly traded companies come on board and just more interest, more money. And so therefore the budgets for some of these publications are increasing on the psychedelics and cannabis side. It's been a real honor and a real blessing to be able to be a part of cannabis and now psychedelics as they sort of come up, especially coming from the traditional side of things. And, I can say, personally, I had many people in my extended family when I got into this space. They thought you're crazy, you're obsessed with cannabis and like drugs, like no one will ever take you seriously, right? And like, look at us all now, right? Like we are making livings off of something that, we are passionate about, and that, we're able to change the world with our knowledge and with our work, which is really, really special. And I do think that, my approach to sharing information and stories, I try to be really, really approachable. I studied social justice and education in college, and we read a lot of this guy, Saul Alinsky, who was a community organizer in Chicago, and he talked a lot about approaching people on their level when you're trying to get a message across. And so I think it's really important to offer the information in ways that are digestible, approachable, and I think it's okay to share stories that are quote unquote maybe outlandish or more taboo, and then also intertwine those with stories of, a soccer mom who's microdosing, right? Like there's literally something for everyone, and there are so many different types of people who are benefiting from these compounds. It's like, how can we make sure to have a lens on all of them, not just, some of the more caricatures or like outlandish characters, right? We all know about like Silicon Valley, right? And we know about things like that, but when you're talking about real people that are having their lives impacted every single day, that's really, really special. And those are the stories that I really like to tell, for sure. And now my aunt and stuff, they're hitting me up for CBD. They're asking about, medicinal mushrooms, not necessarily psilocybin, but, so people's minds change. And sometimes it also takes a personal experience too. Like once you actually know someone, then things will change. So I appreciate you asking.
Awesome.
Yeah. Karina?
I think it's important also to talk about setting the sacred container for this. One thing that cannabis sort of missed the mark on, in my opinion, with mass distribution has been the education component prior to this mass distribution. And so we have this window of opportunity right now to do it differently, especially because unlike cannabis, I mean, psilocybin is more psychoactive, right? And can be more traumatic. Raising your subconscious and taking you for a ride. So, yeah, it's our responsibility to state, like, this is intense and it's very potent, and setting a safe container, a sacred container, and that can be taboo for a lot of people, but it is what it is. Nature is sacred. This is a nature plant. We calibrate to the nature plant. It has its objective. We have our objective, and they coincide. So having it be a social aspect of gathering would be really, really special and bring us back to an indigenous sort of way.
No, absolutely. And I'm glad that you mentioned that, because that is something that I take really, really seriously in what I do every day. Because to your point, we are indeed setting the stage, right? And we're the ones that are educating the public about this, and we're setting up an industry, and this is the first chance, And so, yeah, I take that very seriously, and I think a lot of other people in this space need to as well. I think a lot of them do. I think some don't, but I think most people do, because we understand what these compounds can do for humanity, right, for the greater good, and we all take that pretty seriously, I would say. So I'm glad you touched on that. Yeah, for sure. Were there any other questions?
I'd like to, just fundamentally, we know there's a stigma, but what is the source of that stigma? And is it because you get high? Is it some other, because it's illegal? If you're, from your perspective, is there a core to that thing that we're constantly?
Well, I think we touched a little bit earlier about how the way that these compounds work in our bodies and the experience that they give to you can be, kind of, it goes a little bit against some of the messaging that we've received, right, from society, and it frees your mind in a way that I think can be scary for people. Now, historically, one of the big things was in the 60s, this counterculture sort of revolution, combined with civil rights, people wanted a way to control, right? They didn't like what was happening, the ways that people were starting to think, right? Because it seemed scary to the status quo and dangerous to the status quo. And so, certain, people like Timothy Leary, who were a bit, outspoken, all of a sudden it was like, well, we need to rein this in. Let's criminalize these compounds. And so then, once it was drugs are bad, the war on drugs, all this messaging for decades and decades, it really was ingrained in so many people, as we were speaking about earlier, and so, especially with prior generations, if that's the only messaging that you've been hearing from, your teachers, from your politicians, of course, there's a likelihood that you'll take it seriously. Plus, stories of people having their lives negatively impacted one way or the other, those tend to be more amplified, right, at least in the past. So now that we're hearing that, actually, these compounds aren't as dangerous as they maybe were perceived as in the past, they can actually do things for us that are positive, that they can actually help our planet, help our society. People are starting to wake up and realize, like, hey, maybe some of that messaging that we were hearing before wasn't 100% accurate.
And I agree with all that, but in your opinion, did it really was kind of centered out in mid-century, like McCarthyism, with all that was going on there, and then Larry, then they had to put a lid on it. But was it not, did that ideation go back further? 2,000 years?
I've been contemplating this a lot since coming here, because my family was very conservative, and not religious even, but just conservative. And if I could sum it up in one word, it would be innocence. So this disrupts the innocence of our comfortable lives within a construct that we can understand. So you can't unsee things that you see. You can't undo that. So once you go down that path, you have to be conscious that you're choosing to evolve. You have to be conscious that, okay, I'm choosing, I'm actively understanding, this is my free will, I'm partaking in something that will challenge my comfort in a construct that is limiting. So if I were to say, you know, at what point, at what age is it appropriate to drink? At what age is it appropriate to consume something that'll wake you up and make you so uncomfortable that you actually have to be an active participant in changing the construct that you're within? I would say 25, because that's the age that our brain stops developing. So I would give your brain the chance to just develop naturally, and then at 25, start to challenge it and grow it, because the neurological pathways that you create with psilocybin make you smarter. Simply put, they make you smarter. And once you're smarter, you have a harder time relating to people, and then you also understand you have a responsibility to educate and be active.
You see that, you know, individual or the concept of society, that they see an outlier, you know, like, you see the outlier, you gotta like eliminate or kill it. You have a new idea, you're crazy. When you just have, you know, invent something new. But there's the group mentality of like keeping it confined.
Yeah.
Is that the core of the issue of because it's mind expansion, and somehow the machine or the animal or the thing that society wants to.
Well, you can easily lose your mind if you're not being careful. If you're not being careful with your intention and your practice. If you're going out solo, experimenting with mind-altering substances, you can go off the rails to a point where you get suicidal, and that's not wellness, right? So that's why setting a sacred container of individuals that have exceeded that journey past you is extremely important.
Absolutely, thank you. So I want to be respectful of time. We're at 3:00. If there's any other questions, I would invite you to, come up to any one of us afterwards. We're all more than willing to speak more and answer more questions that you may have. I just want to give everyone a chance for any last final words, final statements. I'll say for myself, I really look at the psychedelic experience, every journey, as an exercise in mindfulness. And that's how I like to go into it. So I just wanted to share that caveat. But Maximo?
I guess my personal experience with taking psychedelics is I like to take them in order to maybe work through something that I feel I'm challenging with in life, or maybe if I feel like I'm in a stuck point, something that's kind of weighing me down. Sometimes I'll maybe use some psychedelics to kind of get me through that. I don't know, this is maybe a little off topic. I don't know if you're familiar with much of the MK Ultra studies, but MK Ultra studies definitely were looking into use of psychedelics, and that was like CIA funded research. So I think when that stuff, started coming out and coming to fruition and knowledge, that's what created a source of propaganda and wanted, there was some sort of, control that, maybe some level of entity didn't want, the people to have. Well, I'm sorry. Yeah, right, exactly, right. Yeah, mind control. Yeah. It's, yeah. 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 Right.
Yeah, I would say I think this stigma is something we've definitely changed in cannabis already in the last half a decade or decade. And so I think this has already paved the path on how to do this. I definitely would have never thought 10 years ago that I could talk to my grandma about cannabis and they would be willing to try it. And now they're coming up to me, like every one of my friends is telling me about these CBD gummies. Like, what are they? What's this? And so I see the same path happening again. I think we're going to remove the stigma, hopefully a big rescheduling of drugs, because the no medicinal value definitely is part of that core of what do people believe about this substance, and our society tells us it has no medicinal value, it's highly addictive. And most of us know that to be false. So that's something that I think we'll see in our lifetimes for sure, and it'll be hopefully much sooner than it took for cannabis to go from decriminalization to medicinal legalization. And this will just be the next drug in the path, and then other plant medicines can also follow this pathway too.
So I like the questions about why these became illegal, because I think it's important to navigate it in a very conscious way. And I think they became illegal, from my perspective, not because they're harmful drugs, but because they lead people to wake up and abandon social conventions, and the culture at the time didn't like that. But and there's a risk of that healing, like the other topic we've been discussing. Healing can be disruptive, and these things do need to be used consciously and navigated consciously together, so we can, bring them back for use, for healing and growth. And so it's really neat to live at a time when we can have these conversations and the openness, and even have these medicines without facing legal consequences in places like Colorado. So thank you for joining the conversation.
Karina, any final words?
No?
Crushed it. Okay, cool. Well, thank you so much for being here, my fellow panel. I appreciate you. Thank you all in the audience for being here and being a part of this conversation and this event. It's a really special time in history to be a part of. We're all really blessed to be here. So thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you guys.